I'm Claire Parker.
And I'm Ashley Hamilton. And this is Celebrity Memoir Book Club, the podcast where we read a celebrity memoir that's been signed to a major publishing house and then becomes unsigned by us. And we do that version, the independent version.
Once again, a nonsense analogy. We read the books so that you don't have to. And if you like them, we thank all of our 5-star reviewers at the end personally. And if you don't like them, you're free to just read the book yourselves.
Totally. Claire, if you were to write a memoir of your own, what would you title this past week's chapter?
Emily in Paris.
Because you're going to Paris?
Yeah, I'm really excited. I'll tell you guys about it when I come back. I have to say, I definitely am like in this space right now where I'm like, was it so smart to book a trip to Europe right after coming back from Australia and then spending a weekend at a wedding and then immediately turning around and going to Paris? No. I've made better decisions. And I feel like this one was like a real gimme. Do you know what I mean? Like there was no reason. This was an unforced error, I believe they call it.
No one even asked you to.
It was actually more difficult to make this trip happen than not. And yet here I am compounding the interest of flights, but I'm excited. I'm ready to go and like just be very off grid. I know famously Paris doesn't have any internet. Paris is on fire, I think.
Yeah, and also from Emily in Paris, I think that the whole premise is that they had to like send her to France to participate in this French marketing firm because there's no way to communicate back to America.
Exactly. They don't have Zoom yet.
Yeah.
And Ashley, if you were to write a chapter about last week's essay, what would it be called?
Okay, I know we joke about Bug being like emotional and a bit entitled.
I don't joke. Journalism. I accurately review.
I guess I'm wondering how people have made this not happen with dogs, because all of the research that I see, there's always people getting on TikTok, this is the research, saying like dogs don't have complex human emotions, blah, 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 this and that. My dog is furious with me right now.
Your dog went on a hunger strike, and I you guys know I don't indulge her nonsense. Like when she's like, Bug's writing a novel, I'm like, no, she's not. Bug is like not smart. She did go on a hunger strike
once when she was mad at me.
Like she is petty and pissed.
She is petty and pissed. So we were gone for 3 weeks, and then we turned around and went to a wedding for a couple of days, and now I'm back. And this morning, she was just like calling me names. I was like putting pants on, and she was like, those look like shit. Those look like shit. You look like shit in that ugly body.
Oh, the dog was saying that? Okay. Well,
she was looking at me like she wanted to eat me alive to death.
Because of the way you looked in pants?
No, because of what I've done to her by abandoning her for weeks. And so like everything I was doing, she was calling me out. I guess what I'm wondering is, are all of them like this?
Or did you just get a bad one, or did you ruin yours?
Did I get an extra good one with the most thoughts, or did I ruin her?
Cancel the podcast, cancel your friendships. You have to like buckle down and just hang out with Bug.
I do have to cancel everything. Anyway, should we get into this week's book?
Yes.
Who is that girl?
It's Eve.
Oh, I have something unfortunate to start this episode off with.
Okay.
I don't think that Eve is enough of a name to be just
one
Eve.
Name. Because we already have like a pretty famous Eve.
Who?
Adam's wife.
Oh, Adam's wife. No, I just think it's so... I kept on trying to Google things from this book to even like fact check, and nothing comes up. I don't know. There's billions of Eves.
Can I say, I was trying to look up her Instagram, and it took me a while to even find her
Same.
Instagram.
It took me a while to find her Instagram, and she has almost 3 million followers. I was trying to Google this one kind of like feud she had to get the real story on it, because I don't know if she was completely saying the whole story in this book. And I just couldn't even find anything.
Yeah, I was thinking about looking up who the boyfriend she doesn't name is. And then I was just like, I don't know, man.
It's impossible to find.
You, sir, won the internet today.
Who dated Eve? Adam.
Yeah, literally.
Who else dated Eve? Like literally I was getting Bono's daughter, Eve. My algorithm was like Eve Hewson. And I was like, no, Eve. What's her last name? Eve, you know?
Evening.
Eve of Destruction.
Evolution.
And I was having a really hard time with it.
It's funny to be like, you know, Eve. And Google's like, who's that girl? And you're like, Eve.
Exactly. So the book starts with her talking about how she also hated her name, but then she changed her mind. And I was like, oh, this is where we diverge.
Well, she hated her name because she was raised a Jehovah's Witness. And so she would go to church and they'd be like, Eve is like the embodiment of all sin. And she'd be like, I don't know how I'm going to beat that. And then they're like, no, Eve means first woman and your middle name means of the universe. And that means you're like the only woman alive on the universe. And she's like, well, now that's something I can work with.
It's actually quite interesting.
And she says that's actually why she's never felt competitive with any women, because she already knew in her heart that she was the first and only woman. And she's always been competitive with men. For example, when her first album went out, Jay-Z calls her up and goes, hey, don't worry about it. Like, it's so hard right now for women. And she goes, hard for women? I just sold 200,000 copies in a week. Napster had just started existing. Everybody was struggling, and she sold 200,000 copies in a week. For Jay-Z to call me up and explain how the odds were stacked against me as a woman when everyone was fighting an uphill battle was ballsy, so I had to show him.
And she talks about using Jay-Z as her like unspoken challenger for years. Like everything she did was to prove Jay-Z wrong. And same.
Unfortunately, I think Jay-Z is currently winning in the Ashley v. Jay-Z showdown.
No, I know, but when this call happened, Jay-Z was doing better than Eve. It's only a matter of time. Just kidding. Mine is random open micers that said one rude thing to me 15 years ago. This actually got me kind of fired up when you do a good job and then someone will be like, hey, don't worry about it. It's really hard. And you're like, what do you mean? For our first ever live show, someone came up to us afterwards and said, well, how do you think that went? And we were like, I guess not as good as I thought.
He said, that's cute. And we will kill him.
He's my Jay-Z. Just kidding. That's like a really high compliment to pay him.
So she was born November 10th, 1978 at Penn Presbyterian Hospital in West Philadelphia. Her mom, Julie, was 17 and her father was named Jerry. Oh my God, that's just like me.
Your mom is named Julie?
No, but you know my father's named Jerry.
Oh, okay. Just the second part.
Yeah, that's just like me.
Okay. Her house had a dark aura, she says. She lived with her mom, her aunt and uncle, her grandparents, and I think her other aunt and cousin. And her granddad developed a drinking problem and would come home drunk at night and just kind of go after everyone.
He would turn on the lights in the house and just start yelling and arguing with everyone. We walked on eggshells whenever he was around, and every time he came home from work, we'd all run upstairs and hide. Then one day, many years later, he just changed and became this smiling, lighthearted person. It was crazy. Her grandma, on the other hand, was a Jehovah's Witness, and she's like, no one knew where either of them came from. They both kept their backgrounds incredibly mysterious. We knew like one fact about our grandma, which is that she had a sister who she wrote to, and that was it.
Well, I think that saved us some real pages in this book, and I'm grateful to them. Not every grandparent needs to tell their story in your memoir. So her parents were not together, and she would go to her dad's family's house on the weekends, but her dad pretty rarely showed up.
Eventually, he stopped showing up, but I still did. And as much as I love my grandparents and my cousins, they weren't the ones I wanted to be with. I wanted to be with my dad. So I started vanishing back. I matched his energy, and one day I said, I'm done, and stopped going to visit him at my grandparents' house. I just couldn't take it anymore and had to tell myself I'm good. And she's like, this desire to get his attention really drove me to become famous. She's like, I just always wanted everyone's attention because I felt like I was in a crowded house. My dad didn't like me. And she goes, and I give him a lot of respect because when I got famous, he didn't really come back. And I was like, okay, mad respect.
Cool. At one point also, she's like, well, he was doing drugs, so I totally understand why he was absent. And I'm like, oh yeah, I understand too.
So she was pretty musical growing up, but she like noticed that all the other girls were singing. And so she had to figure out a way to stand out, and she came up with rapping. She even started a group called DGP with the other girls at school called Dope Girls Posse, which is very cute. But then her mom got remarried and they moved out to Germantown in the suburbs. And so DGP got disbanded. There, they had a new baby. She like was one of the primary caretakers of this baby. She's like, well, it was on me because I had told her I wanted a little brother. So I took the kid to daycare and watched it after school every day.
Oh.
I was like, totally.
And then in high school, she finds Islam and temporarily converts and starts going by the name Mecca. She still wanted to rap, and she was like, I am not being true to Islam if I also pursue rapping, so I have to abandon Islam.
The high school she had switched to in Germantown was like way worse than the school she had already been going to. And she just started cutting classes, and all she really cared about was being a musician. And she like found a local producer who would work with her. And so she's like, I would go to 1 to 2 periods, and then I would cut class because I had to go pick up my brother from daycare after school. So she had a limited amount of time every day to work on her raps and her rhymes. But she got really into it.
Yeah, and she would just do open mic nights all around town. So her stepdad took her to her first concert, and after that, she was like, it's going to be me on the stage.
She was getting like a pretty big local reputation for being in these rap ciphers. she would go and do like rap battles. And something she knew about herself was she was not strong at freestyling. So she would spend hours like writing poetry. She really saw her entryway into rap as like a poet who then had to learn to take her lyrics and put them to music. But she developed quite a little reputation and a name for herself.
Also with battle rapping, she knew that she was going to be up against men. And she was like, there are only so many things that you're going to talk about anyway. So I didn't really have to freestyle. I could just come up with like small dick jokes. Yeah. And
your rhymes suck jokes.
And inevitably it'll apply to one of the people I'm rapping against.
She started working with a local producer named Scott Storch. I don't know if you've heard about that gentleman.
Oh my God, you guys. I think Troy's old episodes of Dunzo are on his Patreon. We did a Dunzo episode about Scott Storch, and that guy is nuts. It's so funny to hear him called a skinny little kid because I think when we learned about him, he was like a bloated up cokehead.
But at this point, he was just like a local legend producing for the Roots, who were Philly's like own rappers. They were a big deal to the kids there. It's funny because I feel like you think of Philly as having so many famous people, but she's like, Will Smith and the Roots. I'm like, surely there was more. I guess there was Eve.
Yeah. And Scott Storch, it seems.
She started writing her own songs with her friend Merv. She would write her own versions over other people's songs.
When she was cutting school, something I think is so funny is that the main reason she would get caught is because she was slow.
Yeah, they would call her Turtle. There was cops in the high school and they would just like catch her and then she would just run away again later.
And they would be like, stop running away. We'll catch you. You're very slow.
So she's working with this guy Merv. She's writing her own versions of like Lil' Kim songs over other people's beats. She was doing talent shows, open mic nights, but she said she was pissed that like things weren't leveling up quick enough. Here I was at 15, already annoyed that I wasn't a rap superstar.
She was going to give herself a year, just finish high school.
So her mom is like obsessed with her finishing high school and then going to college. And she sits her mom down and goes, I'm not going to go to college, but I will graduate high school. And here's the deal. I promise that if I can't make it in 1 year, I'll go to NYU and become a special effects makeup artist, which is like quite a plan B.
It's quite a plan B. And especially this whole like, I'm going to go to NYU as my backup plan. Meanwhile, I think she's gone to like 4 days of high school total.
Yeah. So she ends up starting to strip. She dances for a total of 2 months. And basically it was just a problem of how do I get money? She had felt like she'd been really cramped in her parents' house, cramped in her grandparents' house. She was just a broke teenager who was like, well, here's a quick and easy way to get a lot of money that I could save up for my music career.
I also don't even know how she made money rapping because she would just rap instead of do lap dances.
Yeah, she would often say, I'll rap for you. And if you don't like it, I'll give you a lap dance for free. I guess men are very honorable in the strip club. And they were saying, I genuinely liked that. So I will pay for my lap dance.
That's so funny.
She says it did not go well. It was just not her calling. I was the laziest stripper. I just didn't want to do stuff. I didn't want to touch anybody. And I damn sure didn't want them to touch me.
I hated moving my body so much.
I have to say, yeah. A big part of stripping is the athleticism. It is just like so much moving all the time.
But then she starts getting positive feedback from her bad lap dances / good raps. And then one day this guy comes into the club called Mace. And he was like, you have to tell me more about yourself. And he introduces her to the Rough Riders.
They end up spending the night like driving around in his car, like doing raps together. And she says she's so creatively inspired and she's so excited. And he's like, you got to get out of here. Like, this is not how you pursue music. You got to go pursue music. Later, that guy goes on to become a pastor. And she's like, that makes sense because he changed my life. And then she talks about how if you become a dancer or a stripper, it follows you for a long time, sometimes forever. To this day, I'm still asked about it. I'm like, are you serious? After a whole career, this is what you want to ask about? It's not like I'm ashamed of it. It just wasn't my path and it wasn't for me. She also knew that she would have to address it head on as soon as she became famous. Otherwise, it would be used against her. So she did. She talked about it in a magazine. And she had to call her mom and be like, by the way, mom, I'm about to be honest that I was a stripper. And her mom's like, oh, that makes sense. You randomly had so much money and were so moody when you were 17. She goes, these days when I hit the strip club, I'm much happier as a proud customer.
So then she talks about her Aunt Karen, who is a key part of her rap persona. Every rapper has one, and if they say, nah, that's just how I am, they're probably lying. It's a switch we flip when the cameras turn on. I think that's kind of cute. I don't know. I feel like a lot of people are just like, this is my persona. They don't tell you.
And it's very like the Jane Goodall of it all. Like nobody is exactly the same when they're being watched.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Watching something inherently changes it. So to pretend that your like on camera persona is exactly who you are when you're alone with your friends, you're lying. Just be honest. You're lying.
So she starts learning how to write songs more. She was doing a lot of battle rapping before and just like throwing out a couple bars, but she did not know how to write a full song. And so spending time really diving into that with the Rough Riders was really helpful to her.
She also talks about how she got her paw prints. If you know anything about Eve's look, you know she has 2 paw prints on her breasts and they're kind of iconic. And she goes, how did I get them? I don't remember. I had a couple of drinks. I think it might have been a dare. And then she says later in life, she almost got them removed. And her mom was like, you can't get them removed now. That's your branding.
She talks a lot about how her whole look came together just from vibes. She has a lot of really iconic things that people relate to her blonde hair, her red hair, all these different things. And they were all just kind of in the moment decisions. None of it was planned except for my ambition. I was a girl trying to find her place in the world one rhyme at a time, though I had some false starts along the way. So I think it is interesting the way she draws everything back to like the consistent factor was that she wanted to do something big, but she wasn't sitting there calculating like, if I make this move, will it make me big? It was all just like one drive towards the top, but everything that happened along the way was like kind of her spinning in whatever direction she felt.
So she moved to New York City to quote unquote go to NYU and become a special effects makeup artist. I don't even know. Like,
did she apply to NYU?
Do they even have that degree? I really feel like this is her Portia de Rossi. I was going to be a lawyer. It's just something she said. And then as soon as she moved to New York, she goes, well, I can't waste my time in school. I got to be focusing on the music. Okay. So you moved to New York to pursue music.
So she starts stalking managers. She would go to management offices and like wait outside to give managers her demo tape, to give record label people her demo tape. She was just like around people in the music industry.
And then she gets a call from 2 guys that she grew up with. And they're like, we're about to meet Dr. Dre's right-hand man. Do you still rap? And I'm like, I guess when people like JoJo have just like the most random ass managers and you're like, what do you even know about the music industry? It's these guys. These are guys are like, well, I can connect a rapper I grew up with my friend's cousin whose dad is Dr. Dre. So she shows up to Dr. Dre's friend's house under the pretense that she's going to sell weed. She gives them her demo, performs for them, and they're like, fuck, I think we found our girl. By the end of that week, I was on a flight to Los Angeles.
So now she's signed to Dr. Dre's label, but they're just not doing anything with her. She's like hopping on and recording some verses and kind of learning about music production. She's sitting in on sessions whenever she can. The Slim Shady LP just came out.
But it never feels like her turn. And she's like, when do I get to get in the booth and record my album? And she says this is a very bizarre experience because they set her up with a bank account. They're very official and professional. They give her a bank account. They get her an apartment. She has spending money. Like she's more comfortable than she's ever been in her life. But she's like, I don't know. I've been waiting for my shot. When will it be me? My main feeling though was how come this isn't moving fast enough? I didn't just want to meet these kinds of people. I wanted to be them. I wanted to be their peer.
So then she gets dropped from that label because they had been ignoring her. And I think she was making quite a bit of noise about it, which is like correct.
I guess I just don't understand music labels at all. Like something I will never understand is the music business. I don't understand why they sign people and then never help them and then drop them. I don't understand why it seems like no music label has ever had a sense of what good music sounds like. Even though like the number one constant in almost any industry is innovation, they're always like, you can't do that. We've never heard it before. Wouldn't that be a good thing? Like, I don't understand why they're always putting people on their labels, refusing to let them release music and then not letting them drop. Like, I don't get it. I don't understand this like war of attrition where like you sign people just so no one else can. I really feel like so many creative industries are run by people who hate the arts. It's bizarre.
And it's just getting worse. So then she gets a call from Scott Storch being like, do you want to come do a verse on this Roots song? And she was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So she goes, she does a verse. They say, do you want to come be in the music video? She shows up for the music video. It's the wrong address. She doesn't know if it was on purpose or not on purpose, but she did not end up being in the, I was supposed to be in the video. She was not in the video.
And then she doesn't get credited for her voice. And people just assume it's Erykah Badu.
Erykah Badu was also on the song. So when there's another female voice on the song, people are like, oh, that's also Erykah Badu.
That song ends up winning a Grammy. And of course, because Eve is unsigned and uncredited, she gets no part in it. Years later, Questlove gives her his Grammy from that song as an apology, but it's broken, which I'm like, how does a Grammy end up broken?
How'd you break your Grammy?
Aren't they thick and solid? But she's like, I already had my own, so I didn't need his. But still, like, what the? Imagine that. Imagine you're just some like kid hustling your dick off. You're 19 years old. You're trying your hardest.
Your song wins a Grammy and you don't even get to say you're a part of it. And Instagram doesn't even
exist. And you can't even
exist.
get invited to the party.
You can't even blow this up on TikTok.
That feeling of being anonymous was hard for me to shake when that situation first happened, especially when it was timed nearly perfectly with being dropped by my label. Disappointments shouldn't happen that close together if you ask me, but they had. I was fortunate though because Mark Byers was still riding with me and he became my manager. And he goes, don't worry, we're headed to Yonkers. What's in Yonkers?
The Rough Riders.
Have you ever heard of DMX? So she talks about DMX, about how he was like really intense, but he was nice to her. Like all of the men at Rough Riders really took care of her. She was like not their little sister, but their twin sister.
Yeah. I had to give myself a lot of pep talks before I joined the Rough Riders.
She's so funny. She's like, I knew that it was my last chance. And I'm like, last chance? I think you're 19.
I think she was 19 at this point. But I guess at this point, she had already blown her 1 year by a year.
Yeah, it was her last chance according to her NYU Special Effects School, which is like a quicksand situation.
This is such a funny book about how everything feels so urgent. And then as soon as it happens,
you're like, it's happening too fast. I'm not ready. Why would you do this to me? I'm just a kid.
And then also about how life and careers are so long. Like there is so much time for just things to happen. If you're like, okay, if this doesn't happen in the next 4 weeks, I will fall off a cliff. And then once it does happen, you're just like, oh, actually, I could have spent another like 2 years preparing myself for 18 years of like an avalanche. So she felt like it was a do or die situation. She walked in for her kind of audition to the Rough Riders where she just had to battle rap everybody in the room. And I guess she did a really good job. I kind of blacked out. Words came out of me, but I was consumed by the moment. I don't remember what I said or who it was aimed at. All I know is when I came to, everyone was cheering like, oh shit.
So I would like to tell you guys the story about how the Rough Riders came to be. They date back to the 80s when Darren Dean, we call him D, and his brother Joaquin Dean, we call him Wah, they started their own company. They were in the streets pretty heavy and funneled that work into a record label to stay out of trouble. Their goal was always to help artists, but also to keep them off the streets. They knew better than most people that they weren't the best place to be. So they'd see guys like the Locks around the way and when they were younger and pass them money and sneakers so they wouldn't hustle to get them, all while they kept building and building their empire. X was their first artist, DMX. Mm-hmm. But they had major plans in place. And she's like, it took them a while, but then when it popped off, like obviously it really popped off. And so they had like a real system. They had built from the ground up their own studio in Yonkers, and they had a real system of like bringing in what they called the puppies. Eve, all the new artists were little pups, and they would train them and they would send them to these songwriting and like prep boot camps. And they had these methods of, they would have you do a verse on an established artist remix. And then they would do these like albums where every track was off of one of their new artists. And then they would put it out into the world and see like what people were naturally gravitating towards. And the winners of those like track offs essentially, or whoever's remix first was doing the best, would get to then go on to do an album. So they had like a real system in place, and it really helped her foster this like brotherhood amongst them all. And she really felt safe and included. And she said it was such an important crash course in like songwriting. And she felt very mentored and taken care of.
She felt very taken care of. She felt very insecure when she was first signed. Well, I was the first to really see my potential and knew that I could grow into the artist I wanted to be. Dee was the motivator, my coach. So she gets put on a couple of projects, but then she does a verse on the Rough Riders anthem.
Remix, I think.
Remix. And it goes crazy.
And she becomes like the golden daughter of the puppies.
I felt like people were investing in me and my career. I finally felt like a star with all the rough parts of putting that video together. She's finally putting out a song that's just hers and people love it.
Also there is the producer Swizz Beatz. He's Dee and Wah's nephew. And she's like, but there was no nepotism involved. He actually worked harder than everybody to prove his place.
That's always true.
And I'm like, totally. It was just random that their nephew was hanging out with all the next up and coming rappers. That's not nepotism. That's a different thing.
Listen.
They actually blind chose any 12-year-old to get to come and be raised in this music haven. And it's so crazy it was their nephew.
If I've learned one thing from his wife, Alicia Keys, it's that you shouldn't do anything extra to prove you're better than everyone else. If you're already the most beautiful person in the world, you're not allowed to wear makeup. If you're already the most successful producer in the world, why does it matter that your uncles are in charge?
That was a very internally consistent sentence. That made sense top to bottom.
Remember when she actually was wearing makeup?
Yeah, of course she was. And even if she wasn't, she was spending like $100,000 on facial. You know what I mean?
Did you go to the Brooklyn Museum to see her and Swizz Beatz' private art collection?
No, but I think you told me about it. I think you said they're big art.
Really big arts. If art was like good based on how much square feet it takes up, it's the best art.
Oh, yeah.
So she opens this next chapter, which is kind of about female friendship and competition, by saying that she used to lie about Will Smith being her cousin. I used to lie and tell people Will Smith was my cousin. I don't even really know what I was hoping to get from that. The rumor is that he has a sister and she couldn't make it in the industry, so why would a random cousin be able to?
I get it. I might start saying that about myself.
No, me too. I think that that's a really smart thing to say.
I'm Sarah Jessica Parker's niece.
That's why we always have Thanksgiving at your Aunt Sarah's house.
That's why I live in New York City, to be close to family.
And I always tell Uncle Matthew, don't worry, we took the train here. No car driving in our book.
Anyway, being the only girl in a sea of dudes is lonely. She was considered the first lady of the Rough Riders, and she's like, that's cool, but I kind of thought me and all the other first ladies of the other rap groups would be hanging out and doing brunch, and it turns out that's not true at all. They saw me as competition.
Every rap group has a girl, and I guess all those girls don't hang out. She says that for the most part, in those early days when she would have successes, everyone was really excited for her, but other women, it was really hard for her to get along with them because they hated her.
I know this might sound naive, but I didn't want to be competing with the girls. I was out for blood with the guys, though. I didn't want to be a girl who could just rap. I wanted to be seen as a great rapper. So why would the girls to my right and to my left be trying to fight me instead of the men trying to hold us back? It just felt so aggressive and unnecessary. And she's like, I would try and go up and say hi, but a lot of them were mad at me. Lil' Kim did not like her at first. And she's like, that's on me. I approached Lil' Kim as like a fan. And it turns out that's the wrong energy. And I was like, of course it was.
Do you know something interesting about this book and Lil' Kim? Is that Lil' Kim's book that we've been waiting on for 3 years that was supposed to originally come out, and I think
November 2020.
I think it was 21.
Okay.
That book and this book have the same co-writer. Since the first announcement of Lil' Kim's book, I think that writer had time to like fully sit down and do Eve's book and probably several others. Anyway, she does say she did make friends, and this is something that I find a little bit, not everyone is going to be friends with everyone. So if you're saying, well, these 5 people were my friends, isn't that enough? How many friends do you, like, not everyone gets along all the time. And I'm not saying you have to feud or fight with people. I'm just saying when you walk into a room of 12 people to like actually like 6 of them, that's a good ratio. So now she says she's always trying to big sis new talent when they walk into the room because it feels really good to have someone look out for you.
She'll even go into a meeting with you. She'll jump on a verse. Eve, get on the pod.
What if we just asked her to do a verse on the podcast?
What if we asked her to do a verse in the Ashley Simpson autobiography?
Yeah, intro.
And we were like, but like for us, not for her.
She also admits in this chapter that like she was dissing other women, but it was like just for the track. And she's like, I didn't actually hate them. And well, maybe they don't really know that. It is possible that in your mind, you're saying this is obviously for the performance and not real. Other people haven't got that same memo.
So she starts talking about her debut album, and one of the big hits off of it was called Love is Blind. She talks about where the influence for that song came from. And when she was a teenager, she remembers being in the hospital and holding her friend's baby while she was sitting there having just given birth, covered in bruises from an abusive boyfriend who had gotten her pregnant and then left her high and dry. That song was initially for me, but later on, when the rest of the world heard it, I understood it was for them.
I found this very powerful. This opening line, I don't even know you and I hate you. I would feel that way too about my friend's boyfriend.
Yeah. See, all I know is that my girlfriend used to date you. That's so true.
That's so good. Swizz Beatz was a great producer to work with on the first album. She says that there are some producers who will just show up and give you a beat and say, okay, here's your beat, have fun. But Swizz is really sitting there producing the shit out of the record. He's a real producer, period.
Things were moving so fast. She was trying to take it all in. The photo shoots and studio sessions, writing, keeping up with the demands of being an it girl who everyone wanted to hear. It was a constant nonstop cycle. From getting up to working in the studio and drinking, smoking weed, then back at it.
My name was everywhere. I was everywhere. I was being invited to places I'd never been before. They say your new life is going to cost you your old one, though, and I didn't know just how real that was going to get until I went on tour.
Jesus Christ, and don't I know it? And I'm barely on tour. I can't even imagine what she was doing. So on September 14th, 1999, her very first album, Let There Be Eve, Rough Riders First Lady, was released. It's hard to explain what that felt like, mainly because, again, it just happened so fast. I didn't have any time to process what was happening. Before I knew it, I was selling like 200,000 copies in the first week alone. Not to mention hitting the #1 spot on the Billboard 200 as the third rap girl ever to do it, after Lauryn Hill and Foxy Brown.
I had just turned 21 and I was thrust into a life I had never known before. Sure, it was the life I claimed I always wanted, but once you're in the thick of it, it's hard to see all of the good, and the bad keeps popping out at you.
My name was everywhere. I was everywhere. I was being flown all over the world. I mean, she had this insane thing happen where she said within 2 years of ever being on a flight in her life, like flying out to LA for the first time in her life, 2 years later, she was being flown like private to do private concerts. Like that is such an insane, rapid escalation of fame. I like don't know how you would process it.
Well, she didn't.
We'll get to it. She doesn't. But I felt her manager, Mark, at the time too, was becoming less and less available. So she ends up working with his cousin, Troy Carter, who was around a lot more. I think these are the kind of mistakes that she doesn't necessarily own up to. And it's like not her fault. Like, why would she know better? I wonder if in hindsight, she goes, oh, just hiring whoever happened to be there as a manager. A manager is such a key person on your team. That just like the guy closest to you should not be
your manager necessarily.
She had this crazy thing happen where Prince reaches out to her team and goes, I love her. I want to do a verse on my song. She goes to Electric Lady Studios. You may know it, Swifties. And he's there. He goes, I'm going to a Lenny Kravitz concert. When I come back, I want to hear the verse. She writes it before he even gets to the concert. He brings back Lenny Kravitz, loves her verse. Anyway, so now she's on tour and things are going bad.
I was trapped in a hurricane of my own making. There was all the partying. Everyone was smoking and drinking and I wanted to keep up with them. And so I kept doing it too. So she was doing shows every night and then partying with her friends on the bus afterwards.
She did 30 shows in 60 days, which is like psychotic pacing.
She brought 3 friends on the road to like work for her.
Quote unquote.
Quote unquote.
And she's like, I gave them the easiest jobs. There was a girl who was wardrobe and her job wasn't even to style me. It was literally just to bring my clothes to the venue.
And she didn't.
She's like, all they did was smoke weed. Then they started really going after each other. And they were all kind of like, it became very Hunger Games. Who can stick it out till the end? And she felt a lot of pressure to be able to keep up and keep partying.
And then one day she just goes into her hotel room and starts screaming until she's like catatonic on the floor.
And Troy comes in and he's like, listen, we're going to pray, but I have to tell you, I'll do what I can, but you're just broken. You are completely broken. He didn't fight me on wanting to leave, especially after seeing me in that condition. There was no way that I could finish. I was able to leave that tour, thankfully. There was really no other option. I had experienced a nervous breakdown, and so I spent the next 6 months trying to recover from it, all while keeping my career going as best as I could. I knew that I had to make some real changes for myself. 30 shows in 60 days would actually be the death of me.
Oh, yeah. Especially imagine partying afterwards. I had to clean house mentally and physically. A lot of the ties had to be severed during that time. I fired everyone I had with me except Troy. She was also in a horrible relationship during this time.
She says this, which I think a lot of young people need to hear. It was trial and error for me, but I learned that it really came down to how I wanted to be seen as a performer. I would see all of these rap dudes just high as fuck on stage, and I'd wonder how it all worked out for them. Honestly, it kind of hadn't. And I think that's something that's so important to see. Sometimes I think you can be on the outside looking in and being like, why is everybody getting away with so much? Like, why do I seem so fragile? Why is it so much harder for me? In reality, the people that you're looking at going like, well, look what they can do, they're suffering. Or you look at the quality of their work, or you look at the quality of their life, or you give it a couple of weeks or a couple of months. I don't know that anybody on earth can like party to that degree every single day and be working at that level and be doing a good job personally, emotionally, professionally. I've never heard of it being done. So if you feel like there's something wrong with you because you can't keep up, just know like they're not being honest or you're not seeing the full picture. Nobody is succeeding that way, and definitely not for like a sustained amount of time, not for more than 6 months, not for more than a year.
Yeah, I think there are some people who can operate at a certain level. And I think there are some people, especially when you're younger, who can like really fire on all cylinders in a way that is shocking. And there is always a burnout.
Yeah, there's always a toll to be paid. Yeah, maybe you can get away with it for a year or two when you're 20, but like don't feel the need to keep up. They're not better off for it.
So anyway, she wins a Grammy for her second record. It was a pretty big deal to be able to bring her mom because she says this was a replacement for her mom not getting to see her in like a graduation cap and gown because she didn't graduate with her class because she failed gym. I will say that is embarrassing.
Winning a Grammy?
Not graduating on time only because of gym.
Can I say?
Yeah.
My college had this thing where you had to do a swim test. And I was like, oh, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I'll do the last one ever offered. And then my grandma died and I missed it. I almost didn't graduate because of not even a gym class, but like a single swim test.
What is the test?
Can you go from one side of the pool to the other?
Could you?
Yeah. Always have, always will. But the problem was the test.
So for her second album, she calls it her industry album because she made it to appease the industry.
It's called Scorpion, and basically they were very strict with her. She would have loved to take some time and let the creative juices percolate and just like get her mind right. But they were like, no, we got to strike while the iron's hot. We're going to tell you who to work with, where to work with. And she said it was such a different vibe because she was in these studios with people. It wasn't with her friends and family and her Rough Rider puppies. It was like with who they scientifically decided she should work with.
And at this point, she wasn't like in a cocoon with the Rough Riders anymore, because through the Rough Riders, she was signed with Interscope, and Interscope was really calling the shots on this album. And they made her work with Dr. Dre, who had signed her and then kept her on a shelf for a year in LA when she was like 16, 17, or I guess 17, 18. And so she kind of hated Dr. Dre.
So she's like, I'll work with him, but I'll make it difficult. Listen, I respect it. I would have been a little bitch. I would have been like, oh, you made my life hell, but you're so much more successful than me. And they said I had to work with you. Like the fact that she found it within herself to be like, you control my future, but I'm going to make your life hell is...
I guess I'm wondering why Dr. Dre showed up. Like, why did he keep coming to these sessions if she was like screaming at him?
I guess he goes where he's paid to go.
That's smart. I wish I was like that.
It's with Dr. Dre that they make Let Me Blow Your Mind with Gwen Stefani. This song ends up winning her a Grammy, and it was her idea to get Gwen Stefani on the track. And again, everything about the music industry that I learned makes me ask a third, fourth, fifth question. She had this idea, and they were like, no, what would that even be called? What would you even do with a rapper and a pop star? How could we even think? And she goes, well, think about like Aerosmith with Run DMC, Walk This Way. She's like, there's just been a lot of examples of crossovers. What's that song with the country star? I can hear it. There's like rain in the background, and it's like Nelly and a country singer, I think.
Are you talking about when it's like Dido and Eminem?
No. It's the one like they're at a motel and it's like they're girls on the other room. I don't know. Somebody knows what I'm talking about, but it's like so good. It's like country, and I think it's Nelly. Anyway, it was her idea. They said no because they're so stupid, and they're like, we've never seen it done before. And she's like, you literally have. And then of course it goes on to win a Grammy.
It doesn't even go on to win a Grammy. It goes on to like invent a Grammy category.
Yeah, and then it goes on to create, even more importantly, a really good friendship, because she ends up doing Rich Girl with For Love Angel Music Baby, which was like a fucking hit and a half.
Come together all over the world.
From the hood to Japan, every Harajuku girl, what?
It's all about what?
There's a song where I cannot tell you one lyric.
Oh my God, I looked it up because I was like, what are they saying?
If I was a rich girl. She did Life Is So Hard. No, no, no. Who's that girl? She's like, we thought it was a hit, but we had heard it so many times we couldn't even tell anymore. And then it turned out it was, in fact, a hit. And she goes, crazy to think that we weren't even sure if that was a good song or not. And it's now the song I get the most calls about like usage rights for.
The space of time between being a regular person and a star was so short that at that point on my ride, my old life still wasn't that far in the rearview mirror. So at this point, she's still dealing with a lot of personal turmoil. She only gets into some of it, but one of the things was a terrible boyfriend.
We couldn't figure out who it was, but it's who she wrote, You Had Me, You Lost Me.
There's some guy I don't know, and then apparently she dated T.I. and Nelly, so I don't know who...
Steve J was the other guy, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know who the song is about.
Basically, she was like, I don't know, it was just so bad for my mental health to have to date this guy who was cheating on me constantly because I was like retreating inward and he loved being seen together. And then finally she buys a house in New Jersey and she's like, it was way better for me to be not around him, but he was still technically my boyfriend and cheating on me, and that sucked. She says it changed the way she viewed men for the rest of her life, basically. It was very hard for her to trust again.
Yeah, she says for the next several years, she dated like a dude and would just kind of like use and lose people, just kind of run through dudes. And then it took her a really long time to meet someone that she was like, oh no, I've got to reconnect with my feelings. So at this point, she also is pretty pissed off at her label. She doesn't like the way they don't listen to anything she says. She's going into renegotiation. So her first 2 albums have done incredibly. One of them is double platinum. One of them is already platinum. She's like, I don't understand why they're not offering me a fuck ton of money right now. So at some point she calls Suge Knight because she thinks that having him vouch for her will like get her a lot more money. But instead, everyone is just so scared of him that they're like, what are you doing? Why is he calling here?
And then finally her manager is like, you cannot work with that guy. So she calls Suge up and she's like, hey, they said that we need to stop talking right now. And he's like, listen, if you were my daughter, I'd say the same thing to you.
Wait, were they dating? She kept saying they were hanging out. They were spending time together hanging out.
I don't know. In hindsight, she's like, I don't know why I thought that that would be helpful. And I do think if anything, it hurt because now they were like pissed and saw her kind of as a loose cannon.
Yeah.
I guess, can I say something that I was frustrated with this book is like, I think the music industry makes no sense. And I think it's incredibly racist and misogynistic. And I think she was up against a lot. She writes this book like in thematic order instead of chronological order.
but also without even really like wrapping up any of the themes.
So you'll see she's about to get dropped from her label and she's like, I don't know, just out of nowhere, my label dropped me, my manager dropped me. And then in the chapter after that, she talks about how she would like had a huge drinking problem and got a DUI and was partying and doing drugs constantly. She's like, why would they drop me when I'm like this huge hit maker who's so successful? And I'm like, yeah, why would they? Fuck them. But now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, I guess you're getting DUIs, you're drinking every night, you're showing up late to set.
You're bringing like murderers into the building.
Yeah, you're sending murderers into conference rooms when you're not getting your way in a negotiation. I get why you seem to be seen as difficult. Not that that's right. Like she should not have had to feel the need to get Suge Knight involved.
She shouldn't have had to call a murderer in order to be heard in a meeting.
But I understand how, like if we were having negotiations with someone and they sent like a murderer to my studio, I would be like, well, I don't really want to work with you. I'm scared. But that's just me, and everyone knows I'm so scared of murderers.
Everyone knows I'm a coward.
Bug can't take it. She can't sleep at night knowing there's a murderer at the door.
Overall, having to fight so much really was kind of torching her love of the game. She just wasn't having fun doing anything anymore. And I think it can be really hard to be living your dream in a way that is extremely lonely and you're like not being heard. Your label isn't respecting you. You're not getting to work with the people you want to work with. Your boyfriend is evil. She just like stopped having fun.
Meanwhile, on the good side, she's becoming a huge actress. First, because it was like the era of having rappers do cameos in movies and stuff. She's getting a lot of cameo work and she decides to take it seriously and she gets an acting coach. And then she gets a role in Barbershop.
That kind of changed her life.
I loved playing the role of Terry Jones. I related to her. I knew her. She would have been one of my friends. Little did I know that I would get to even grow with her for years.
She also ends up with her own sitcom.
She was going to play a character and then they were like, should we just call the whole show Eve? So she's like the executive producer and star and namesake of a UPN show. I have to say UPN and WB.
It really brings you back.
They're two of the most nostalgic phrases I could hear. I really wanted to keep the title as it was. I was only 24 and didn't know how to really fight for things just yet. But they insisted that it be changed. And she goes, it was a great opportunity for me. Well, when I wasn't screwing it up. So, I mean, understandably, she was still going to the clubs. She was partying. And it's a very intense work-life balance. You know, a sitcom hours, that's 12, 15 hours a day. Then she'd go straight to this place called Teddy's, which was a club at the time. And she would party till 4 or 5 a.m. Then she'd have to be back for a table read at 9.
And she did not always show up for the table read at 9.
And she goes, listen, I don't have a lot of regrets, but I do think looking back, a lot was riding on me. I think we could have made it to season 4. I didn't realize what a good, incredible gig that was. There was a lot of people's jobs riding on her. And she's like, but it was also not fair because people were so hard on me. I was the youngest one. Everyone else on the set had like a family. She's like, they didn't even want to be clubbing. So they had nothing to fight against.
That's so true.
She's talking about how everyone on the set of Eve was like a family. Everyone got along. I remember my makeup artist on the show, Rhea Ann Silva, applied my makeup by cutting up small sponges into different pieces to apply my makeup. Don't tell anyone, but I'm working on my own set of sponges, she told me. Rhea Ann later invented the beauty blender.
That's crazy. Good for her.
I don't know why, but I'm like, I want that memoir. That is so cool to me. Like, I love that. I guess I love sponge entrepreneurship because I love Sponge Daddy as well.
I had no idea you were such a sponge. Actually, I did know that you were really into sponges.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, I guess I do have like a whole sponge thing. I mean, it just reminds me, I used to do a joke about how we're like innovating all the wrong things. Like there are baby things in our life that could get better. And the fact that someone looked at the daily sponge and said, before we get to the moon, why don't we cut some holes in this thing? I love shit like that.
That's amazing.
We're not done with the littles before we move on to the bigs.
Do you know what I think there's like a lot of work to be done on?
What?
Doorknobs.
I could see it.
I just think they're not as effective as we act like they are. Like I have a door in my apartment that just like gets jammed sometimes.
I think the knob shape, I know that's not great for people with like arthritis and stuff.
I was literally going to get to that next.
And you think about how often it's coming undone. I guess door handles are great.
And I was thinking about how sometimes the screws start falling out in a different doorknob in my house. So the knob will just, every couple weeks I have to tighten it. Otherwise it's just dangling there.
You know what I just remembered the other day? Remember for how the last 2 years of my old apartment, people would just close the door to the bathroom and then get locked in. And I'd be like, what are you, stupid? You can't close the door to the bathroom.
Yeah, I used to really dread having to pee at your house because you would have to hold the door shut with a piggy bank.
Well, what did you think?
No offense. I just didn't like that about your house. Anyway, so then
She had stacked her plate too high. I was also filming both Barbershop and later Barbershop 2. And around that time, I started putting together my fetish clothing line. So she's like getting really overwhelmed. Plus, she's in this movie XXX with Vin Diesel.
What? It's Triple X, Claire.
Okay.
I talk about that movie all the time and the way it shaped me.
How do you know that you're right?
Well, because I've watched it a million times.
They say it in the movie.
Yeah. It's just like what it's called.
When you talk about boy movies, I tend to tune you out. When you choose to act, you have to make that switch. You have to learn how to discipline yourself and lead a whole new life while you're filming. I have so much respect for my fellow actors because I know what it took for me to become one. Again, that was a pretty turbulent time all around because I was dealing with a lot. And I do mean a lot.
So a lot also includes a sex tape that was leaked. It was filmed 7 years prior, right around the time that I had a nervous breakdown. Even though it was less than a minute long, it brought me back to a terrible time in my life. So that means it was filmed with the ex that she wrote that song about.
So she gets a call from like a mob queen and she's like, why don't you come over here and just pay that person off? And she's like, I don't want to pay somebody off. And everybody's like, listen, when a mob queen calls you and gives you an offer to pay somebody off, you can't just say no. But she kind of does. And she gets the FBI involved and they do this sting operation where they get somebody to cross from New Jersey to New York. So now it's like a federal crime and they fucking handle it. And she goes, sometimes that clip is mentioned and I just kind of roll my eyes. But one reference to it in particular felt especially unnecessary. And it was Joan Rivers. She's like, leave me alone. Instead of dwelling on it, I just keep the machine running and keep working on my goals.
So she was also launching her clothing line. And when she was getting ready to launch a clothing line, she would just call successful people she knew and be like, can I take you out to lunch and pick your brain about this project? And then they just would.
Ultimately, cost her a lot to make and did not make money. And she had to shutter it. And then she tried to do something with Echo Unlimited and that didn't really work. And she ultimately is like, people just weren't listening to me in the room. They weren't taking me seriously. I had great ideas. And I do believe that they were not taking her seriously. I will still say.
She was also like filming a TV show and making movies. And she like just installed her mom as her proxy.
Also, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of people who've dedicated their life to making fashion labels and they still don't work. Dion Lee just shuttered. Like, I don't know, this idea that if they had just listened to you, you would have had a successful clothing company. Like, I don't know. It's actually very difficult. I do believe they weren't listening to you, but I don't necessarily think anyone who wants a successful clothing company just gets to have one.
I also think that a lot of it is about like having the time and the money to just stick it out.
Yeah, I agree.
And as soon as things weren't fully working, she shut it down. And she says she regrets that. Because, I mean, there are also famous people who do have clothing lines that work.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do with like Victoria Beckham. I think that line was not successful.
I mean, look
for
at
like
The Row.
Years.
The Row was a Walmart brand.
And so I think that for a while you have to just like have wins and losses. And then there's like a test of time that is a huge part of it, which she just didn't do. I underestimated my own insight and intuition, and I got taken advantage of in many different ways. Those days are long gone, though. Try doing that to me now. I dare you.
She fast forwards to doing a Rough Riders reunion tour at the Barclays Center after DMX passed away, and how at the end of his life, they weren't in touch anymore. But it wasn't because they had a falling out or hard feelings. Just like everybody who had started out at that little camp, you know, it's just like real kids camp. You're all kids, you're having fun, but then life gets in the way and it takes you in different directions. And you went from like becoming the upcomers to becoming the it people, and they all had their own things going on. So now she's recording her third album, Evolution.
It was 2006.
And in the blink of an eye, I was all alone. Interscope, who was her label, seems to have given Troy, her manager, his own office. He is now managing Lady Gaga, which made me think, oh, did he manage JoJo?
Oh, maybe.
Remember, she had that guy who ditched her that made her cry? How many managers could Lady Gaga have?
I bet you a lot.
Dang, and we have zero?
Yeah.
What are we, not even worth a tenth of Lady Gaga? That's actually...
No, I would say definitely not even close
to a 10. What percent of Lady Gaga do you think we're worth from a net worth perspective?
0.5.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So the problem is Interscope is now shelving her. She is recording track after track after track,
including Tambourine with Will.i.am and Mary J. Blige.
That song is so good.
If it's not ringing any bells, may I ring a tambourine?
Ring a tambourine.
It sounds like that, kind of.
It sounds like these are really good ideas. I recorded so many songs. I had one track where I rapped over the White Stripes' Seven Nation Army. That would have been a total contrast to what was going on in rap at the time.
I love
that. They said
that.
no. I had Mark Ronson wanting to executive produce my whole album. They didn't want that either.
I don't understand who has power in the industry, because if Mark Ronson can't be like, I'm a hit maker to being up with a hit maker, like if that's not enough, then what is?
Pharrell wanted to do the same and it was still no. I had a song with will.i.am, one with Mary J. Blige, nothing.
Like, how do none of these people have the power to say, no, let's just do this?
I don't know.
That's what I don't understand about the music industry. Like, why do none of them know good ideas? How come I, Claire Parker, can go, yeah, Eve should absolutely be rapping over Seven Nation Army, but Jimmy Iovine doesn't know?
I recorded all these songs and the label refused to work with any of them. It felt like they stopped believing in me and didn't know where I fit. They just pushed out Fergie's album after she went solo from the Black Eyed Peas and they signed Lady Gaga. I felt like the label had no clue what to do with this rap chick, so they opted to do nothing at all. I felt blackballed, but most of all, I felt so alone. I mean, maybe she was blackballed.
See, that's what I'm saying is like, I 100% am on her side. I believe like it is insane that anybody who's achieved this much success, who's clearly this talented and hardworking, is like not having more help on her side. But that's what leads me to go, well, what is the missing part of the equation here? Like, what do you mean all you wanted to do was be friends with other women and none of them, like, what is happening? Like, what's the unsaid part here? And unfortunately, as somebody who was kind of excited to read this book, I walked away feeling like I knew less about Eve. Do you know what I mean? I'm like,
yeah,
I actually have more questions than I came with.
Yeah, it was kind of difficult. I felt like it was written in a way that was not particularly cohesive.
I do think the weird timeline of it all
Yeah.
is bizarre. Like to start a chapter with DMX's memorial and then like work backwards from there to be like, and now I don't have a label. I'm like, it didn't come together for me in terms of like painting a larger picture.
I just think especially because, yeah, the timeline of it all, randomly it just jumps forward 12 years and then it'll kind of creep back and explain, but like not in a way that really fills in the holes. Anyway.
You can't tell the story of your partying days on a separate timeline than the story of you getting dropped by your label.
Yeah.
Especially when it seems like they are exactly concurrent.
So it turns out the record label had a meeting where they discussed 25 artists that they were considering dropping, and someone called her to tell her she had been mentioned in that meeting. So she just emails Jimmy Iovine and is like, it seems like you don't want me here, so could you perhaps release me? And they ultimately let her go, but I think she gets kind of dicked over.
Something so weird happens where they kind of hold her to the publishing rights. They claim that like her last two albums were only one album, so she still owes them. And the music industry needs to be overturned. As soon as we get America,
as soon as we get Ariana Grande in office, we need to do something about this.
But it really is. I'm like, how can there not be a second system when it seems like this system has never served anybody?
Yeah, I guess I feel like every single artist has had a story about the way the industry has like fucked them over in some way, except for like Dave Grohl.
I don't know. I feel like it's the industry's fault he had that baby out of wedlock.
If they'd only been clear about how many acres his property was on. In the end, my fourth album was shelved by Interscope indefinitely. And then because the industry was just being so bullshitty to her, that's when she really dove headfirst into acting. So we're just kind of jumping back and forth here. So then she goes headfirst into acting. Via acting, they try to recruit her into the Church of Scientology, and she luckily resists. She won't even eat the food that Scientologists serve her at lunch because she's scared of being drugged.
And this is when she starts going to Teddy's every night. Teddy's is a club outside of the Roosevelt. She's having so much fun. She's an it girl, and she kind of plays it off like it was almost her job to be there. And she's like, I became such a regular that I would show up in my Uggs and Juicy Couture sweatpants. Like I didn't even need to dress up to go there anymore. I knew the owners. And she admits, she goes, listen, I didn't want to go home and be by myself and think my thoughts. So I got caught in this cycle of working really hard, partying really hard, and then being hungover. So that there was always like a secondary thing that was numbing me, be it the pain from a come down or like the fun from a come up. I didn't want to feel or give a fuck or care what was happening. So I became kind of a high functioning zombie.
And that's when she has a DUI. So she's leaving Teddy's and she just crashes into the divider in a road.
And totals the car. However, before leaving Teddy, she had invited every single person at the club to an after party at her house. And one of the members of the club was Sean Penn. And apparently he's the only one who showed up. And her cousin was like, oh, Eve's not here. She's at the police station.
Well, so Eve calls her cousin to be like, I'm at the police station. I need to be bailed out. And also, FYI, I invited the entire club over. So if people start coming over, that's why. And she goes, yeah, there's some white guy here. And it's Sean Penn.
So Sean Penn goes to the jail to bail her out, which is so nice. And she's like, I recognize that was very nice. But I was like, you have to leave because if the paparazzi catches me walking out of the jail with Sean fucking Penn, that's going to double the amount of headlines. And that is true. So she calls up her cousin and is like, come over and get me out of here with $30,000. I was charged with a DUI and later sentenced to probation, during which I had to attend AA meetings and wear an ankle monitor for 56 days.
So she was forced into sobriety.
Around the same time, I left Interscope and parted ways with Troy, which was producing all sorts of emotions. I wanted to be numb, but by law, I wasn't allowed to be.
For the first time in a long time, I had to process what was going on in my life, and I had to deal with it all. So many thoughts and feelings flooded into my mind, and I had to feel every last one of them. I briefly did therapy too, but I also worked with a healer who helped me unpack what I'd been through.
I think this is one of the sentences that made me go, Eve, I do think the qualities that made her able to like break down so many barriers and be so successful as a woman in a time when like there was like so few women succeeding in this field are the exact qualities that make her terrible at a memoir.
Yeah.
And I think it's like a toughness. It's an ability to like be like, all the guys I knew were really nice. Anyway, I was having lunch with P. Diddy, who happily gave me advice for my fashion line. Like, I think she has this ability to just be like, as far as I can tell, I love women and men are really good and nothing bad happens. And I went to therapy twice and I fixed all my problems. And I'm just like, okay, I don't think that that's how it really works, but I believe that that's like your experience or that's your reality. And that reality made you good at what you did, but makes you bad at writing memoirs. Because that's not how life works.
No.
A couple pages ago, you were having a nervous breakdown where then you immediately started doing a new album. Like, you don't just fix those things.
She also says there was another, like, you should sober up moment before the DUI. She was drugged at a party. She says she took a drink and then all of a sudden felt like out of body, something was taking me over. I realized I had been drugged.
I think she was having a panic attack because then Janet Jackson shows up with like an aspirin and hot sauce and she goes, and I was right back with it.
You know how drugs work. Sometimes Janet Jackson's hot sauce does the trick.
Narcan or Janet Jackson's hot sauce, one and the same.
But it is a funny story that Janet Jackson was the one to hop into action and save the day. That's the kind of celebrity story I want from a memoir. I want Janet Jackson curing your anxiety or drug attack, and I want Sean Penn to show up in jail. That's when I want name drops. So then she starts trying to work on her 4th album, and she's trying to get signed to a new label because she has been released from Interscope. And she's having a horrible time. And this, I will say, does not, I feel like, have as much to do with her reputation as it has to do with disrespect of women. Mm-hmm. Because at this point, she doesn't have a track record of like, you know, showing up with Suge Knight at these offices. And there are men in these meetings, like whispering to each other and laughing when she's trying to do a presentation. And she's just like, would you do this to a man with multiple platinum albums who walked into a room?
Yeah. This is what I don't understand about the fucking music industry is how they can't put their misogyny to the side and just like do good business.
Yeah.
Like, this is a woman with a proven track record in multiple very difficult industries. I don't understand why everything is so hard all the time.
Shopping my 4th album was pure trauma, and it had a lot to do with finally entering the boardrooms that I hadn't been brought into as a signed artist. So now that she's trying to do this by herself,
she ultimately sees how she's being treated and is like, fuck it, I'll do it indie. So she does a deal for distribution with Sony Red, but she is producing and promoting this show completely on her own based on the reputation and the connection she's been building in the industry her whole life.
And she still loses money on it.
Lip lock. We'll give it a listen.
This wasn't going to be an industry album no matter what. I was in an era of my music career when I could experience things I hadn't before. So she is having a fun time being an indie artist, because she became a star so quickly that she never got to do small venues. She never got to do kind of like a fun punk tour. And now she's getting to. So that's kind of a nice way to look at it. The critics liked it too. One even suggested that it should have been titled Evolution since I was being more adventurous. People genuinely felt my honesty. I spent more money than I made, yet again, but it was worth it. Lip lock was a lot of work though and took me more time than ever to produce, release, and promote. But at least I can say that I did it. And then finally she falls in love. So she does this thing called the Gumball 3000, which I had never heard of, which I guess was like the point. They did not want Claire Parker there. It's for like super, super, super rich people to drive their very fancy cars. She goes, this one was going from London to New York. You just drive 3,000 miles. And I was like, I didn't know that there was a road
that you could even, I was like, don't tell the pores about the secret road, Eve. I wasn't supposed to know about it. So she gets like stuck at a Canadian border because of her DUI. And this guy, Maximilian Cooper, shows up. And he figures it out. And basically what he figures out is like,
go to a different checkpoint
and lie about who you are. I mean, really, it's very sneaky. But they kind of are interested in each other. And they start dating. And right away, she can tell it's something different and it's something serious. And she had never dated a man who was so intentional. And she had been so broken and heartbroken by that first guy she dated. But she starts being like, no, you're an adult. He's an adult. You both have baggage. But let's see what happens. Before Max and I met, I decided my casual dating days were over. For years, I'd been on this roller coaster
of connections that lacked any real meaning to me. I moved like a guy, which you could call a result of trauma from past relationships, but what I call emotional survival.
So finally, after a few years of long distance dating, he was getting out of a relationship. He's a very present dad. She's a working artist. It was very busy. They decide to live together in London. And her friend goes, I can't believe you're going to do all of this without a ring. My response to her was like, look, I'm doing this to see if I want a ring.
I actually really respect that.
I know. That's why I underlined it. It wasn't like I was going to be forcibly planted in London and couldn't go right back to the States when I wanted to. The truth of the matter was that I always felt like I was going to live in London or Europe one day. And this is why I was doing it. And I think that that's something, we were just talking about this with Worm to the Wise, that sometimes people will take a next step in a relationship to see if it works and it doesn't work. And they're like, well, now what? And it's like, well, that was the test. Why would you get engaged to a man you haven't really full-time lived with?
Yeah. And also, like, why would you keep progressing in a relationship when you've taken one step up and then found out you don't like it?
So she moves in and they're really loving it. They agree that they will not get engaged until they're like ready to get married. They want to have a short engagement. So they don't get engaged until December 25th, 2013, and they get married that next June. She becomes like a very loving stepmom to his kids. She's like, I see them now as bonus kids. They really taught her a lot about herself. She said his kids are very affectionate. They hug, they say, I love you a lot. I wasn't raised that way, so I acclimated and I'm happy that I did. She loves their in-laws. And she's like, it's just been a lot because, I'll tour and then I come home and instead of going straight on vacation, I'm going straight to the country with like the entire family. But we've overcome it. She's like, it was tough. He's a great dad and she likes that about him. And she is like, listen, a lot of people were against me dating this random old white dude. I don't even think he's old, but a lot of people were like, literally, why would you date that guy? And she's like, I don't know. We like each other. She hates that he's given more respect in terms of being the breadwinner. She's like, we both fucking work. I pay for a lot of shit. But at the end of the day, I will tell you this much.
And I don't even know what he does. What is this car?
Gumball, of course, but that's why he's rich. She says that like for sheiks and stuff. It literally has nothing to do with you, Ashley.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, why would people assume that like a famous person and a guy who does a secret car party, like why would the secret car party be richer than the famous person?
Because it's a secret.
Okay, well, I'm also the owner of a secret party and none of you are invited.
We know that's not true.
I'm very rich.
We know that we already can tell. Okay, if you're so rich, where's the road from New York to London?
I'm not telling you because I'm one of the riches who can't talk about it.
Anyway, I'll tell you this much. Maximilian Cooper is my biggest fan. He is so happy at my shows. He walks around and greets people, passing around drinks like he's the host. I tell him he's corny, but it's honestly so sweet and adorable. I'd never had a man by my side who supports me the way he does.
I love it.
And then she's like, we are a power couple. I'm like, good for you.
So then she's doing another barbershop movie. She's starring with Nicki Minaj. Actually, she's supporting Nicki Minaj in the starring role.
The idea of being on set with Nicki Minaj just brought me so much anxiety. That's why I decided to seek some help to get stronger for that moment. It was for my own survival, really. I've lived through what happens when women project their own insecurities onto other women. It happened at the start of my career and continued in waves as my fame grew. I wasn't going to be that woman to someone else, but in order to do that, I had to physically and mentally prepare myself. So I guess I like respect the fuck out of the honesty here. But I do wonder why she can't apply that honesty at the beginning of her career when she's like, why didn't women want to be my friend? I'm like, well, you're going to therapy because you're going to be near Nicki Minaj. And she said like she did her best with the Nicki thing and she stayed fit and she stayed sober and she like worked hard and she accepted that she was no longer the hot new it girl. But when they came to her to ask like advice for how to deal with Nicki, she's like, I'm the actor. If you want me to be a producer, you can pay me extra and I'll give you some advice, but I'm not doing extra work for no money. And I was like, good for you.
Good.
So she talks about how her and Regina Hall were both on this movie and they would work out together. And one of the things she did for her mental and physical well-being was work out twice a day, despite like long filming hours. So sometimes after midnight or 1 a.m., they would go down and do 30, 40 more minutes at the gym, which is so intense. She goes, all of this had nothing to do with Nicki, really. It wasn't like I was over in the gym doing squats just to stand next to her or reciting mantras to avoid a meltdown in her presence. This had more to do with me and less to do with her. Really, it had more to do with what she represented, which was an acknowledgement that I was at a different level. I just feel like to have 3 sentences in a row being like, it wasn't about her, it was about me. It was about me, just not her. Like in actuality, though, it was about me and what she represented.
Instead of feeling insecure around Nicki, I started to sympathize with her. I was so thankful that I'd left that part of my life behind. I was glad to be done with it. I think at the heart of it, though, barbershop was a life test for me, and I'm proud to say I passed. The universe was asking me, have you really changed? And my response was, yes, I have. I do really like her, but I will say to be like, I've changed. Changed from what? Because you didn't really give us those stories in the beginning part of the book.
Yeah.
To say this is proof that I've changed, in this book, it's not proof because there's no change from anything previously mentioned. Because I don't know what the previous bad thing was and now you're the good thing.
So then she talks about being on The Talk. She wanted to quit right away because she had been doxxed for something she said about who other? Nicki Minaj. Nicki Minaj had just come out with her Paper magazine cover. And I guess Eve didn't like it. She didn't think it was what she should be doing. And of course, the Nicki stands on Twitter who are very, very, very scary. The Barbs. All love and respect, Barbs. Please leave me alone. They found like a photo that looked like it was Eve from the time she was a stripper. They were very this-viewing her. And she was like, it's just not worth it. She goes, here's the thing about my inner peace. I worked so hard to get it. For so long, I was without it. And when you're in the thick of the music industry, you don't even know what the hell it is. I knew firsthand just how bad it can get in your own mind and how you can completely destroy yourself. So she's like, I'm just going to quit. And they convinced her to stay. And then she's like, what I really learned after staying on it is that they're all fucking liars. She's like, it turns out everybody out there is playing a character. They don't even mean what they say. They're like picking a persona and going with it. I'm the only real one.
She says they're so mean. And the only thing that kept her on that show is when everyone had to go film remotely during COVID. She was like, not being around them and getting to just be by myself before and after shooting an episode is the only reason I was able to withstand it.
Another example of how fake they are, she says, is during the Me Too situation. Julie Chen Moonvest's husband, Les, had an alleged #MeToo situation, and the rest of the girls basically shunned her for it. But to me, something like what happened with her husband and his alleged sexual misconduct has no bearing on how we're supposed to feel about Julie.
Oh.
Plus, everyone seemed to be so friendly with each other. I don't know. I guess I do think when you're a woman who's not only co-signing assault behavior, but also like profiting off of it explicitly, like, fuck you too.
Yeah.
So she's like, I still like Julie. And then she goes, it was so weirdly toxic and people kept coming and going.
I don't think it was weirdly toxic. I think it was believably toxic.
She says, I've never had a podium like the one I had on The Talk. And now I know that when I get it again, I will know how to use it. I guess I do feel like there are blinders on in this book. And like a deal she has made is if nobody fucks with me personally, I'll say I think they're good guys.
It is hard because in Hollywood, where's the line? Like this is a woman that came up in the music industry. So like presumably none of the people that have ever been nice to her are clean.
I mean, nobody out there is clean. Like who are you supposed to go to?
Exactly. So I think that it is like a hard line.
Yeah. I do wonder if this book had come out after the P. Diddy arrest.
Yeah, what would have happened? I guess I think overall this book had a lot of holes because it feels like there are a lot of things she's not fully ready to talk about yet. And I think it should have come out in like 15 years.
I guess I think as of 2 years ago, if you had come up in that world, I wonder if you ever thought P. Diddy could go down. Like they seemed so untoppably strong.
Mm-hmm.
Cassie, you are my woman of the year. I just like cannot believe her strength.
No, she's incredible.
I think about it every day. So then she did the show Queens and she hated it.
It just wasn't that fun. It was supposed to be really fun.
But it wasn't. That sucks.
And that sucks. It was her and a bunch of other women. It sounds like Girls 5 Eva.
So the concept is an old girl group comes back together after their song gets sampled by a new artist and they're all moms and they're seeing if they can return to the scene. Is that not Girls 5 Eva? Girls 5 Eva, you've got some splaining to do.
Oh my God.
Because this seems like it came out first. Maybe it came out second.
So she was also trying to get pregnant at this time and then did get pregnant at this time.
It took her a while to get pregnant and it turned out it was because of her endometriosis. If I have taken anything from this podcast,
it's that every woman has endometriosis. And if you are a doctor, you are going to hell if you missed it.
Yeah, you have to advocate for yourself because so many women have it. It makes me think, do I have it?
Oh, actually, I bet yes, because
I have very painful periods. And actually, can I say on the bus today, finishing this book, I did for the first time went, wait a minute.
Could it be me?
Could I be the bitch I'm yelling at right now saying advocate for yourself?
It's so crazy because we've actually said this exact conversation so many. No, we've talked about how everyone has endometriosis and it sucks that doctors keep missing it and telling women that they're bitches.
And you shouldn't have a painful period. I get such a bad period every month and I'm always like, well, I'm just weak. I'm just the exception. Every other woman is strong. I'm pathetic.
Well,
you know what? I'm going to go get it checked out.
You have health insurance.
Yeah. I'll let you guys know how it goes. I'll talk about it on the Patreon. Sorry. If you don't want to hear about my uterus, that's very valid.
Yeah, but also misogynistic. Anyway, so she does get pregnant and she's very happy, but extremely anxious because it was really difficult for her to get pregnant. So whenever she's like having to work late, at one point they make her redo these scenes and she flips out. Can I say sorry?
Uh-huh. I'm thinking about it now. It is going to be so funny if I do because I'm like, you know how your period gets so bad, sometimes you puke from the pain.
I will say I've always told you no, I don't know.
Oh, I gotta listen to you more. Okay. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
Famously, I've always said, no, not me. I think I say, you know how you get such a bad period that you scream at your best friend 1 week before every single time?
We experience pain differently.
Mine's all up here. If you're listening and this doesn't get cut, she points to her head.
Yeah, she was pointing to her brain. She's got endometriosis of the brain.
My brain tissue is flooding out of my ear holes. Okay, so she doesn't feel that she is being taken care of as a pregnant person on set. She feels that they're being very careless with her time and her energy levels. And she's extremely stressed out. She's trying to do everything she can for this baby.
She also is very like high anxiety because it took her so long to get pregnant and she is so nervous about the pregnancy.
She has a huge predisposition to anxiety.
Yeah, she is like someone with mental health struggles. But I mean, at one point she was like, I wasn't singing because I didn't want to be too loud around the baby.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was just a really tough situation, I think. And also there was like COVID going on. I mean, it was just not the right time.
Luckily, it doesn't get a second season. Or maybe it does, but her character got killed off anyway, so it wasn't a big deal.
So she ends up having her baby. His name is, brace yourselves, Wild Wolf Fife Alexander Sommers Cooper. He was born February 1, 2022.
She opens up about having lost a pregnancy in 2006 or 2007.
And that would have been the opportunity for doctors to like see what was going on with her endometriosis. But of course, nobody ever
checked anything
or tells women anything. But now she just like looks at her baby wild sometimes. And I just say to him, thank you for choosing me. There were times in my life where I didn't feel safe in this world. And I'm just so thankful that I can be in his safe place. The one place where he can go and cry when he needs me. I didn't always have that, but I'm so happy that he always will.
I spent 43 whole years as myself, and now I was someone's mother.
So good for you. Who's that girl? She's Eve, Wolf's mom. And she's very happy, and I'm happy for her. She's been married for quite a long time. They've been married for over 10 years now, I think.
Yeah, the ride isn't rough anymore, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. So there's a lot of skipping around in this book. There's a lot of kind of evidence that if you have a goal, persistence is key, because if you try to just rush there as fast as possible, you really can get lost in the ride.
How many wormtinis would you like to have with Eve?
I guess I would like to have like 3 wormtinis because I want to sort some stuff out.
Yeah, 1 to 2 for me because I'm a lightweight.
I definitely like her.
I just feel like I want to get to know her. I actually have to say, I cannot tell what her personality is like from this book.
I think fun.
Yeah, but I would love to get to know her. And then how fertile would you say the soil is?
It's hard because I feel like there is a lot here, but it's not distributed evenly.
Yeah, I'm giving it 3 out of 5.
Yeah.
Eve, I love your music.
Me too. And thank you to our 5-star wormies.